Hi, everybody. I am Francisco Gil White. This is the management of reality. And today, our topic is the psychology of the of the confidence game, which is something you really have to understand because if you don't understand it, you will be the victim and the object of a con. That's for sure. This is our English language podcast on the 30th of July, 2026. Welcome. All right, so why am I talking about this? I'm talking about this because this is the management of reality. We're trying to explain to you how the bosses who control the institutions that make meanings and that manage our reality, how they do it. How do they manage it? How do they manipulate you? How do they make you inhabit a false world for you to react to? How do they put beliefs and identities and emotions and worldviews? How do they manufacture incentives? All of that stuff needs to be explained if you are to defend yourself from the management of reality. So, exploring the structure and the psychology of the con is obviously something that the people who want to manage you, who want to manipulate you, are obviously doing, right? That's the science they need to master in order to fool you, in order to make you do the things they want you to do without you understanding that you're working for them. So obviously they're studying that or they wouldn't be able to get it done. If you're not studying this, if you're not learning this stuff, then you're just going to get manipulated. Okay? So we need to understand why con men, why con artists can do the things they do. How does that psychology work? And it's interesting because if you are living in a simulated democracy, as we claim, if you are living in a managed reality, you would expect that ordinary social science would not be studying this. Okay, you would expect that there wouldn't really be a mature science of human gullibility, because if there were, and people were learning this in school, and it was being taught in universities, and if there was research about this, then we would be able to defend ourselves. We would know what are the rules of manipulation, how they can be used against us, what are the contexts that should signal to us that we're probably getting manipulated, and so on and so forth. All of that would be a science that we learn in school if this was part of social science. But guess what? It isn't. There's only one man, one, who really studied the psychology and the culture, the anthropology, if you will, of the con game. His name is David Maurer. I'm going to show you his book in a second. Let me just share my screen here. So his book is called The Big Con. Now, David Maurer he started out as a linguist. He was interested in so anyway, just let me before I explain about David Maurer, let me just explain right away what a con is, just in case you don't know. So con is short for confidence game, and these are the elaborate mini managed realities that a very special kind of criminal creates for what they call the mark to inhabit. Okay, so if you're the mark of a confidence game, what happens is that somebody approaches you and they try to convince you to do something that is dishonest that will get you a lot of money, right? And so they have to convince you that this is real so that you will invest your money. Because what they do is once you invest your money, they run away with it. They disappear. Okay, so they need to create a fake mini universe for you to inhabit that convinces you that everything that's going on is real, and that there's a real opportunity of making a lot of money by participating with them in this procedure. And then once you give them your money, they disappear immediately. You never see them again. Okay, that's a confidence game. All right. So this guy, David Maurer, the guy who studied as a scientist the confidence game, he started out as a linguist. He was interested initially in the special language of the con men, of the con artists, because you see the confidence game as a criminal enterprise is a very cooperative kind of crime. So think about making a movie. Making a movie is an incredibly cooperative kind of enterprise, right? You need all of these moving parts simultaneously, each doing their little tasks, all of them articulating under the direction of, you know, the producer and the director and so forth, and the authors, etc. But it's a huge army of people, right? Coming together in articulated and specialized ways to produce a film, right? A confidence game is like that. You need an entire production crew. It's not being filmed, but it's almost like it's being filmed, because you need actors, right? You need a bunch of people to pretend to be certain kinds of persons that do certain things in the world and so on, and to dress properly, to be convincing, and to speak in the right ways so that they won't arouse suspicion. And you need to provide, you know, a whole setup, a whole mise en scène, right? You need what do they call this in the movie business? The backdrops and the you know, the scenery and all this stuff. Jesus, what's the name? I can't remember what the word for this is. But anyway, you need the mise en scène, as they say in French. So you need props. This is the word I wanted. You need the props, right? The plants, the desks, the thing. If you're trying to convince the person that they're in a government office or whatever, it needs to look like a government office. There have to be secretaries at the desks clicking away. The phones need to be ringing. You know, all of that production needs to happen to convince someone that they're really in a place that is an actual real place when all of it is fake, right? You need good actors, you need good props, and this is what they do. And because it's such a complicated cooperative game, the people who participate become like troops. All right, they're enterprises, almost like extended families of criminals. They all know each other, and they have contacts, and you know, you can get different people together for a con and so forth. This is in the golden age of the cons, which I'm going to talk about right now, which was in the early 20th century. And because it's this cooperative, complex, very social kind of crime, the people who participate become a culture. Okay, they become a culture, and they develop their own dialect, their own way of speaking. And David Maurer was fascinated by this, because the con artists, when they were talking amongst themselves, with all the word substitutions that they would use, with the lingo and so forth, the special kind of slang that they had, if you didn't know their slang, they were obviously talking English. You know, they'd be speaking in English. But the word substitutions and the slang and all this stuff made it completely unintelligible. Okay, if you didn't belong to the culture of the con artists, they might as well have been speaking a completely different language. So he starts frequenting them and talking to them, etc., because he was interested in, as a linguist, to sort of work out this special dialect of English that the con artists had developed to talk amongst themselves. Now, as he started doing this work, he started becoming fascinated with the entire culture of the crime, of the confidence game. And by the by, David Maurer became a sociocultural anthropologist, and he ended up doing ethnography of the con, okay, of this very elaborate kind of crime that requires creating these mini-managed realities. And he wrote this book, The Big Con, which is a tremendous classic. It should be considered a work of anthropology and psychology at the same time. And I'll explain a little bit about everything that he ended up explaining, because David Maurer didn't just explain how the big con works. He also gives you a little kind of background on the history of how the big con developed. Okay, I'm going to start there too. So he traces the history of the big con to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where there was this guy. What was his name? Marks. Something Marks. I'll look it up in a second. Who was doing? People were doing 3-card Monte in the streets. And this is something that was happening all over the place. This is still happening. People are still playing 3-card Monte in the streets. Cheyenne, Wyoming was it was a frontier town. It was growing very fast. People were coming in there, from very different places, looking for fortune. It was multi-ethnic, chaotic, growing very fast, booming. And in that kind of environment, there's always opportunities for people who want to make a quick buck swindling their neighbor, right? And so 3-card Monte is one of those strategies. And if you don't know what I mean by 3-card Monte, just think of a million movies where you've seen this, where people are in the street and somebody sets up a little, like a stool or something, and on that stool or that little table they have 3 cards, and they keep moving the cards and then showing you the queen or whatever. One of them is a queen, and they turn it over, they show you the queen, they turn it back, keep moving them, and you're supposed to tell them where the queen ended up when they stop, right? And of course, you want to make them feel like they can win, right? So one way to get them is to let them win a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. They start getting excited that they can guess where the queen is. And of course, they're betting money. So every time you let them find the queen, you have to pay them. But you let them win a few times, you give them a little rope to hang themselves with. And then you make them bet a lot. And then, of course, you work it so that they won't find it. I'll explain how they do that in a second. And you take their money, right? And there's a more complicated version of this, which is when you have a shill, which is very common. So a shill is a collaborator of the swindler, and what the shill does is he pretends to be a customer. He pretends to be a player. So he approaches and he seems unsure, and then you, the swindler, you pretend not to know him, of course, and you pretend to try to convince him to play, and he pretends to be reluctant, but then he tries, and you let that guy win a lot, and then he walks away with the money, right? So that people think, oh, you can actually beat this guy, and if you do, you can walk away with the money, right? You just saw a demonstration of it. Of course, you're going to get all that money back because that guy is your shill. He's your collaborator. He's your confederate, right? But that convinces people in the crowd. And so they start playing, and those are the people whose money you take. Okay, 3-card Monte. So they're doing this in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And this guy, something Marks, I forget his first name. I'll get it in a second. He decides that, so he starts a business that is a dollar store. I think you've seen these in the United States. This is where it started. They're very common. So the idea of the dollar store, I don't know if it's still $1, but the idea of the dollar store is that you go into the store and anything you see is worth $1. Okay, all of the items in the store, they're all worth $1. And so what this guy, Let me check out his actual name so that you know, because this is an actual historical figure. Ben Marks. Ben Marks. Okay, he's an actual historical figure, and he decided. So he had two shills. One would be the guy who pretended to win some money, and then the other one would be someone who goes convince anybody who looks like a fat sucker, right? Someone who's got money and probably is, innocent, gullible. So somebody who looks like a fat sucker is going to go try to convince this person to play. Okay. Now, one of the rules here is that the fat sucker needs to be someone who feels superior. It needs to be someone who thinks of himself as, oh, I'm smarter than average. Because if you don't think of yourself this way, then you won't bite, right? You have to think that you can beat the guy with the cards. So the second accomplice, once he identifies a fat sucker, he'll pretend to provide a friendly service. He'll say something like, "Hey, why not ask to examine the cards, and then you bend the corner of the queen while you examine the cards. That way you will know where the queen is." So you seem to be giving him friendly advice so that he can beat the guy with the cards. But what you're proposing is dishonest, you see? So the other condition is that the fat sucker has to be a dishonest person. So he has to think highly of himself, right? He has to think that he's smarter. He has to have some money. And also, he has to be dishonest enough that if you propose to him a way of making money dishonestly, he might be tempted, right? So you go up to him, you say, "Hey, look, what if you ask to examine the cards, and when you're doing that, you bend the ear of the queen so you can find it later." And you think, "Oh, fantastic." So he goes, he tries, he runs up the bet, he asks to examine the cards, right? And then he does what the guy suggested. He bends the corner a little bit, and doing that, he finds the queen, a few times. He gets excited. He's winning, making winnings, and the bet is running up. It's getting higher and higher and higher. And then what the swindler does, once the bet is high enough, with a deft movement of the hands, he removes the crease from the edge of the queen so that it's no longer identifiable. But he does that very quickly. The other guy doesn't notice what happens. And then, of course, he can't find the queen anymore, and the swindler takes all the money, right? So that's 3-Card Monte in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Now, the game actually came up from Mexico. It was invented by us Mexicans. We invented 3-Card Monte. But in North America, land of enterprise, any good idea becomes an industry. So Ben Marks thought, why not set up a place of business of my own? Why not operate from a permanent base and let the players come to me? That was his brainstorm. And David Maurer says this brainstorm became the backbone of all the big-time confidence games. So all of those movies about con artists and con men and all the lore and all the complication and all of that, it was born in the mind of Ben Marks. Okay, the first thing that and this is why it's because of Ben Marks that these complicated cons are called big store cons. Okay, because Ben Marks' original idea is, I'm gonna open a big store, an actual big store. So so he opened this dollar store. He called it a dollar store. Everything in that store, he had colorful, useful, sometimes even valuable merchandise, and everything in the store, every item was worth $1. And, it would bring in a steady stream of customers. But as soon as you walked in, Ben would deftly switch your interest to various three-card Monte games that were happening inside the store. And the whole setup was inside the store. He had his shields there, his accomplices, doing the thing with the guy with the cards, and there would be more than one game going on in the store. So the dollar store idea was just to get people. It was a gimmick to get people in the door, and the real business was happening with the three-card Monte games that were happening inside the store. Okay, now from this simple idea, in due time, vastly more sophisticated swindles would evolve. And they would be known as big store cons in tribute to Ben Marks. For they preserved the basic structure of his innovation in Cheyenne, which is build a little world and the suckers will come. Except these little worlds would grow in artistry considerably and in sophistication to become bona fide alternate realities created exclusively for the mark to inhabit, and requiring for their staging large and professional, expensive production crews. Maurer says with admiration unconcealed, and quite justly, and I quote, "The modern big store is a carefully set up and skillfully managed theater where the victim acts out an unwitting role in the most exciting of all underworld dramas. It is a triumph of the ingenuity of the criminal mind," end of quote. Yeah, we all like this, don't we? We like these Hollywood movies of con artists because we cannot help but admire the complexity and the artistry of this particular form of crime. And also, it's a form of crime that involves no violence, typically. And so it's a kind of an aristocratic crime, right? It's a highbrow kind of crime. Anyway, it's definitely a Hollywood weakness, the big store con. There are many Hollywood films that are built on this premise. My soft spot is for the first one, the first great big store con film, which is George Roy Hill's classic, The Sting. From 1973, with Robert Redford and Paul Newman in the roles of the leading roles. I don't know if you care about this sort of thing. It won 7 Academy Awards, if you care about that. So let me show you this is the poster of the movie. You've probably seen it. A lot of people have seen this movie. 7 Academy Awards, 7 Oscars. So it's really worth watching. But the interesting thing is, I never knew this when I first saw the film. When I came across David Maurer's work for the first time, turned out that this movie that I like so much is based on David Maurer's book. So they made the movie based on the anecdotes that David Maurer shared from that he heard from the conmen. Okay, because as I said, David Maurer ended up doing ethnography of the con artists, and they ended up trusting him. They ended up trusting that he was just studying them and that he would never betray them to the police. So they ended up explaining how the entire thing worked. They just told him everything. So what he wrote, that book he wrote, The Big Con, it's a very thorough ethnography of the entire criminal enterprise of the Big Con. It's really quite interesting what he did. This is a still from the movie. That's Robert Redford in the foreground and Paul Newman in the background in all their glory. All right. So what is this movie about? What is it that they captured from David Maurer's work? Set in the 1930s in the context of horse racing, because a classic con called The Wire was built around the culture of horse racing. This time, the 1930s, was the Great Depression, and fully 25% of wage-earning U.S. citizens were unemployed as the 1930s began. And there had been some race-fixing scandals for the horse races. And that had produced a ban on horse racing. But now, with desperate souls hoping for easy money and bankrupt state governments eager to tax the winnings, they re-legalized racing during the Depression, and it became all the rage again. And by the time old and damaged but can-do Seabiscuit closed the doldrums decade, heaving his neck across the finish line with a supremely unlikely, hence immortal, win in the 1940 Santa Anita Handicap, horse racing, no less than economic penury, had helped to define an American era. And the same goes for The Wire. The Wire is the big store con that was built around horse racing, and it was set in the horse pool room, so named after the 19th century betting parlor, which had included pool tables so patrons could pass the time playing pool between the races. So, even as David Maurer published his book about this, the culture of the big con was already fading. Now, as we were saying, the big con requires an enormous amount of stagecraft and choreography, sublime in its talent and details. But it's also applied science. For only a large body of field experiments can teach the con artist how to simulate, how to stimulate the mark's imagination in just the right ways, okay? So they're not merely artists of a kind of theater, they are also careful anthropologists and psychologists, because they need to really understand how people think, how they react, and what their norms are, what kinds of cultural rules of behavior they likely follow, in order to build the right kind of little world for them to inhabit and get them to do what you want, right? Con artists also possess a Zen master's patience and hunter's talent for stalking their quarry. For although marks may be plentiful, I mean, it's true that many people can be victims of con artists in principle. They do not walk heedlessly into the traps of the confidence men. You know, they have to stalk them for days and sometimes even weeks before the kill. The requisite skills to lure and fleece this kind of prey are all grouped together in con artist lingo as grift sense. So if you have grift sense, you've sort of internalized the science of how to fool other people. Okay, you've sort of you've developed a kind of a intuitive understanding of the culture, of the psychology, and the foibles and the ambitions of people and so forth. And so you know what buttons to push to get them to believe that you're really doing something real. Okay, that's called grift sense in the special slang of the con artists. And central to grift sense is a highly developed understanding of human gullibility, of course. And that receives a lot of attention in Maurer's work. So his book is on the big store con is an education into how our psyche relates to our running construct of reality. So I'm gonna give you an archetypal con so that you can understand how this works. And the one I'm going to talk about is The Wire, which is also the one you will see in the movie. Okay, and I really recommend that you go see the movie. Remember, the movie is called The Sting. Okay, so this is how The Wire works. You hear patrons chinking glasses and spot the bar at the end as you enter the smoke-filled room. You see a bookmaker taking bets from behind a window, and off to one side is a blackboard where the results of the race will be written. Those results will soon be called by the loud voice now declaiming at an auction-fast clip the breakneck progress of the race. Remember, this is the 1930s. Yes, telephones are in increasingly widespread use, and the radio networks are growing, but for some purposes, this is still very much the world of the telegraph. The caller you hear is not coming through the radio. He's but a few feet away, reading from a strip of paper that grows in his hand as a telegraph ticker spits it out with the real-time details of the race, to which he adds emotion in a fevered play-by-play that simulates an eyewitness and expertly fuels the excitement of the gamblers. What I'm describing here is an actual pool room, right? These things were real things, and people were betting on real horse races, okay? Of course, the con men create a fake one, but there were real ones, and this is what they were like. So there's, as I said, there's a telegraph receiver, there's a ticker tape coming out, and the information coming from the telegraph is a description in what feels like real time to the people in the pool room, right, of the progress of the race. Okay, so the guy who's getting the ticker tape, the telegraph ticker tape, is reading at a fast pace because he has to read everything that's coming out, and also he needs to create the emotion of the race for the people who are betting, right? So he'll say something like, "Springtime Surprise is gaining on the leader. This is the final stretch. Springtime is gaining, but Lock and Load is still ahead. Glory is a distant third, but closing in rapidly. Lock and Load and Springtime and Lock and Load. Now it's Springtime, lunging ahead by a neck, but Lock and Load is not conceding. Glory catching up fast, but we're almost there. And it's over. Lock and Load wins it by a nose." This is, of course, a poor substitute for live TV for anybody who's experienced live TV, but these people have never seen a TV. This is the 1930s. Now, Mr. John Bates, a moderately successful businessman owner of a small department store in Providence, Rhode Island, has come to this decidedly aristocratic horse pool room in New York in the company of a recent acquaintance, one Louis Sanborn. They can both see that prosperous gentlemen are winning and losing large bets nonchalantly. The caller calls the races with great zest. Bets of $10,000 to $20,000 are laid casually. To keep that in context, a $20,000 bet in 1935 is like laying down something like $500,000 in 2026. Okay? That's the kind of place they're in. A temple appointed in the finest luxury for the ultra-rich to go sacrifice. Very large amounts of cash are changing hands like nickels in a crap game. Everywhere there is cash. The patrons peel off large bets from fat bankrolls or from bulging wallets. The cashier counts out 40,000 winnings without batting an eye. Louis Sanborn and Mr. Bates are much impressed. These are our two protagonists. In fact, Sanborn and Bates are quite out of their element. But today, Mr. Bates is a betting man. He's got $10 on Seabiscuit to win and makes $50. He's pleased, but not too surprised. And he makes another 4-to-1 bet on the next race. $50 on his entire winnings. $50 on War Admiral to win. And he makes $250. He picks the winner again. His companion, Sanborn, meanwhile, has done the same thing. So they're both winning. They're both excited. But Bates is definitely the more agitated of the two. And he's sure of it now. He's going to win every time. He's sure. So he goes to bet the entire 250 winnings on the next race. He likes a horse called Chaladon to win. But Sanborn is a little nervous. He's urging caution, right? He's, maybe you're not going to win this one, maybe you want to hang back a little bit. Don't bet the whole thing, he's trying to be cautious. But Bates will not be dissuaded. He goes to place another bet, but too many people beat him to the line. Okay, so a line forms before he can get to the cashier. And so, there's, 6 or 7 people in front of him. And it's not moving very fast. It's moving slowly. The cashier is taking the bet, so he is not sure that he's going to get to the window in time. Starts to grow impatient. Time is short. The race is about to be called any moment now. He pushes the line along, but it doesn't seem to move fast enough. He's getting a little antsy, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, peering ahead, getting a little desperate. Now there's only one man in front of him now who's laying a $15,000 bet. It's going to take the cashier forever to count that out. So he doesn't get to the window. The race is called. He doesn't get to place his bet. And Chaladon, the horse that he was going to pick, indeed wins the race, and it was paying 6-1. So 6-1, his winnings would have been $1,500, which in today's money would be like, I don't know, like maybe $40,000, right? So he's pretty upset. He's jumping up and down with a strange mixture of disappointment, but also excitement, because he did pick the winner. So he's disappointed but excited. What is going on? Why is Mr. Bates so sure each time that he's betting on the right horse? And how come he always bets on the right horse? Right? Does that have anything to do with the fact that he and Sanborn keep racing out between races to the payphone at the next door drugstore? In the interval between races, they go out to the drugstore to the payphone, and then they come back out. They come back in. Yes, there is a connection between those two things. So I'm going to fill out the backstory now so that you know how this works. Louis Sanborn, on behalf of a large corporation in New York, expressed interest in John Bates's department store in Providence, Rhode Island. The context here is, the cultural context here is, Providence, Rhode Island is a dinky little town compared to New York. Okay, so listen to this sentence again. Louis Sanborn, on behalf of a large corporation in New York, goes to Rhode Island and expresses interest in buying John Bates's department store. Okay? John Bates is very impressed. He's the owner of a department store in Providence, Rhode Island. I mean, he's a successful businessman, but relative to a large corporation from New York, such as Louis Sanborn represents, he's very small fish, right? So there's some haggling, and finally, Louis Sanborn makes an attractive offer to buy the department store, and Bates finally agrees to sell. So they both came to New York to consummate the deal with the corporation lawyers. But it turns out when they get to New York that the lawyers are too busy with another deal on that particular day, and they won't be available until the next day. And Sanborn explains that to Bates after getting off the phone with the lawyers. So they need to kill some time, and they decide to go to the pool room. Right? Sanborn suggests, why don't we go to the pool room, kill time. Tomorrow we will see the lawyers about the transaction. So Sanborn mentions that he has a cousin, Charlie Maxwell, who's just around the corner, who runs the central office in New York for the giant telegraph quasi-monopoly Western Union. He says, I think you're going to like Charlie. Why don't we pay a visit before we go to the pool room? Oh, sure. So they go pay a visit to Charlie. They got time to kill. So they go to the Western Union office, the central office, and they find Charlie Maxwell there, busy amid the whirring teletypes, directing a large staff of noisy telegraphers, all going on, much activity to and fro. And as advertised, Charlie Maxwell is a very likable guy, but he can't talk just now. Any minute, there's going to be a scheduled inspection of his office, so he can't leave. He's got to stay there. But he says, why don't you head to your hotel, and as soon as I'm done with the inspection, I'll join you, and then we can all, chat or do whatever. So they say fine. They go to their hotel to wait for Charlie. After a little while, Charlie arrives. Charlie Maxwell arrives, and as they're chatting in the lobby, all three of them, Maxwell takes a break from small talk to inquire with his cousin, Sanborn, about a certain Mr. Brown that through Sanborn's good offices was scheduled to participate in a business deal with them. He's someone they were going to... Sanborn, Maxwell, the two cousins, and this guy, Mr. Brown, they were going to do some kind of business venture together. But Sanborn tells Maxwell, no, this guy was a no-show. It seems like he backed out. So Charlie Maxwell is crestfallen. Oh, that's terrible. I was very excited to do business with this guy. And Sanborn then says, well, but maybe Mr. Bates here will be interested in this. And Maxwell gets a little nervous. He says, wait a minute, how long have you known this gentleman, Louis? And Sanborn immediately says, no, this guy's solid. This guy's a big businessman from Providence. He's a responsible man with his own business. He's an upstanding guy. So Maxwell, he allows himself to be convinced. He's a little reluctant, but in the end, he agrees to tell what's his name? Bates, right? Maxwell agrees to tell Bates what this business is all about, and so they start discussing it. And Maxwell tells Bates, look, I've been working at the telegraph office for a long time, been working very hard, and I've been doing a really great job. And in spite of that, my bosses passed me over for promotion. And so I'm just tired of being underappreciated, and I'm gonna resign. Enough of that. To hell with all that. And because I don't want to be staying where they don't appreciate me. So I'm going to resign. I'm going to take off. He says, but I will not be poor. I know how to swing a deal by which I can make a very good profit without hurting my company in the least. But I must have the assistance of an honest and dependable man, one who is able to put up some funds in return for a share of the profits. We thought this guy, Mr. Brown, who was a no-show, was gonna participate, was gonna invest, but now we can't find him, and I really have to act quickly because I may not have a second opportunity. Are you interested? And so here Bates, he gets a little uncomfortable. What are they pushing him into? But he keeps listening. And Maxwell explains. He says, look, through my central Western Union office, past the raise results for all the bookmakers in the city. The bookmakers are the people taking the bets at the horse pool rooms, right? So through the central Western Union office, pass all the race results for all of the bookmakers in the city, and you got all these horse pool rooms growing fat on the profits from the gambling on the races. And we all know that, rich men with inside information on the horses and all that stuff, they can win big. But the little fellow, who doesn't have the inside information, he can't make a lot of money there. But I worked out a system, says Maxwell, where we can beat the bookmakers at their own game by delaying the results long enough that, to the results that are sent to the bookmakers from the telegraph office, you delay that long enough so that I can phone those results to my assistants who will be very close to the pool room. And then with the information about who won, they can race into the pool room, make a bet, and make a lot of money. So this all seems very interesting to Mr. Bates. It even seems like justice to him. And so Charlie Maxwell just wants to know if Sanborn and Bates would agree to test the system. Could you just test it? I mean, don't even think about investing right now. Let's just go test and see if it works. So they go test it. Bates can certainly be convinced to do that. And the test is very simple. Before betting is closed for each race, they take a quick dip outside into the drugstore next door to use the payphone and get the winning tip from Maxwell. Then they have 3 or 4 minutes to go back in to place a bet, which are small bets for now. And if it works, says Maxwell, we'll try something bigger, but we'll try some small bets first. Now, I've given you enough background now to catch us up to the opening scene I gave you, where Sanborn and Bates are in the horse pool room, right? And they're making all these bets and winning. And Bates couldn't make the last bet, but he still won $250, right? And he picked all the right horses. So the system is obviously working. They have a system test; it's complete. And now Bates is ready and eager to make up for the winnings he couldn't make in the last bet, right? So he tries to go back to the cashier to make a big bet for the next race, but a suave-looking gentleman, a well-appointed gentleman, approaches them, stops them, and he is quiet, he is polite, but he's authoritative and a little condescending. Mr. Bates doesn't know just why, but he feels a little embarrassed. And this well-appointed gentleman, very elegant gentleman, says to them, "Are you the gentlemen who have been placing these small bets?" And he waves a pair of slips, betting slips that they used. And Sanborn says to him, we just made a $50 bet, if you call that small. The manager, for that is who this gentleman is, looks at them with a patronizing good nature, and he says, "Well, I'll have to ask you not to place any more small bets here," he says. "We have other pool rooms for working men. Small bets make too much bookkeeping for us here." So he smiles and he gently starts them toward the door. He's ushering them out. Mr. Bates doesn't like this. He's feeling patronized. He's getting insulted. He says, "Well, how much does a man have to bet here?" And the manager replies, "Well, $1,000 is usually the lower limit," with a condescending smile. "Beyond that, you can go as high as you like. Come back, gentlemen, some other time." And he ushers them out. Now Mr. Bates is itching for a huge bet, right? Working men, he said, he'll show him. First, however, they go back to the hotel with Charlie Maxwell. And Maxwell says, that pool room does some very heavy business. They can lose $1 million and never miss it. My plan is to take 800,000 or 900,000 in 4 or 5 days, then quit. What do you gentlemen say? And they say, we're in. There is, however, the question of capital. The other two are salaried men. So it's up to businessman John Bates. How much cash can he raise? Mr. Bates calculates what he can get from selling his bonds and decides he could get 25,000 within the next 2 days. That would be that's more than $500,000 in today's money. It would have to be in the form of a draft from his banker, but Maxwell says that's fine. There's some haggling on the division of the spoils, right? And in the final formula, Bates and Maxwell decide to split 90% of the profit, with a 10% finder's fee going for Louis Sanborn, he's the guy who brought Bates to New York. Now Bates must go in person to get the money, but there is the other matter. He was to meet Sanborn's corporation lawyers, remember? Because Sanborn's corporation lawyers were going to finalize the transaction whereby the corporation was going to buy Mr. Bates's department store in Providence, right? And that still hasn't happened. So Sanborn says to Bates, look, don't worry about that. I'm going to take care of that. Just send me a telegram as soon as you know when you'll be back, and we'll do the meeting then. We'll do the transaction then. Okay, fine. So then Bates goes to get the money. And 3 days later, he arrives back in New York with the money for the scheme. And soon they're both haunting the phone booth at the drugstore, waiting for Maxwell's call, their flesh crawling with excitement about the money they're going to make, right? And finally, the phone jangles. Mr. Bates rushes into the booth, and it's Maxwell. Maxwell says, hello, he says, is that you, Louis? No, this is John Bates. He says, well, I've got the winner, says Maxwell. Hurry right on over and place the money on Flying Lil. Call Louis and now pass me Louis on the phone, please. I need to speak to Louis. So then Bates passes the phone to Louis, who speaks briefly to Charlie. He says, okay, I understand. Place it all on Flying Lil. Goodbye, Charlie. They go into the horse pool room, and Flying Lil is paying 5-1, which is tremendous odds. So Louis takes the money from Bates's hands and tells the cashier, as he pushes the money through, he says, $25,000, Flying Lil to win. Okay? This is Louis Sanborn, grabs the money from Bates, and makes the bet, and he's the one who tells the cashier, 25,000, Flying Lil to win. The caller says they're off, starts reading the ticker, getting people excited about what's going on as the horses are racing around the tracks. Bates's mouth goes dry as every movement of this race is called. And feels like a lifetime. Flying Lil is doing well, challenging the lead horse. He could win. They approach the finish line, and it won't happen. The winner is unerring by a length. Flying Lil comes in second. All right, hold on just a second, because I'm getting a problem with my... I have to change microphone here. Hold on just a second. Okay. So back to this. Yoel, if you can't hear me, stop me. But you guys should be able to hear me with the other microphone.
Everything perfect, Francisco.
Okay, good. So the caller is reading the ticker. I'm sorry. We were already at the end of the race. So Flying Lil doesn't win. He comes in second. Mr. Bates is dazed. He's stunned. He can't believe it. He and Louis Sanborn emerge into the street, blinking to cope with the light. And it seems with the harsh truth of their loss. And a short distance from the Western Union office, they are met by an exultant Maxwell, who's sure that they won, right? He's grinning from ear to ear, already spending the money in his mind. But then he sees that John Bates has got this grim face, his hang face. And Bates bursts the bubble for him. He tells him, look, sorry, but Flying Lil placed. Now I have to explain. Placed means that he came in second. That's horse race lingo, okay? So when you say that a horse placed, you mean he came in second place. So he tells that to Charlie Maxwell. He says, Flying Lil placed. What? Says Charlie Maxwell. And then he understands. Well, of course he placed. And then Charlie turns to Louis Sanborn in a fury. And he says, don't you know what the word place means? I'll explain what happened. It's a technicality. And the entire story turns on this. As I said, in a horse race, to place means to come in second. But the verb to place can also be used as a command to bet. Okay? So if you give the cashier 25,000 and say, place it all on Flying Lil, which is how Louis Sanborn understood it, then you are betting all the 25,000 on Flying Lil to come in first. Okay, that's what it means when you say place it all on Flying Lil. But if you say 25,000 on Flying Lil to place, then what you're saying is that the 25,000, you're betting the 25,000 on the outcome that Flying Lil comes in second. Okay, so Maxwell wanted that second option. He wanted 25,000 on Flying Lil to place, but Louis Sanborn had told the cashier, place 25,000 on Flying Lil, which would be for Flying Lil to win. Okay, so that's how the mistake happened. Now Sanborn tries to make excuses for his mistake, but Maxwell will have none of it. He rakes the young man over the coals until Sanborn hangs his head, red-faced shame and humiliation. Mr. Bates tries to come to Sanborn's defense, explaining that he had made the same mistake, that he had understood it the same way. But Maxwell turns on Bates and lets him have it too. He gets very mad at Bates. Finally, Maxwell cools off. And he says, well, this was clearly a mistake we will never make again. Can Mr. Bates raise more money for a second try? So that's the con. Now let's explain it really quick, because I know we're running out of time. But I need to connect I'm running out of power and I can't fix this. Hold on. There. So who's the Sanborn seems like a good candidate because he found Bates. He created a relationship with Bates. He suggested Bates as a replacement for Mr. Brown, the original capitalist of this undertaking, right? And he made the costly mistake. Only one problem is that Sanborn doesn't have the money. The money went to the people running the pool room. Now, that problem is easily solved. All you have to do is assume that Sanborn and the pool room impresario are working together and are going to share the money that they got from Bates, right? And that's a con. And that's, in fact, the case. Sanborn and the guy running the pool room are working together. But then what about Sanborn's large corporation, the one that was supposed to buy Mr. Bates's department store in Providence, Rhode Island? Well, very simple. There was no such corporation. Okay? With his silver tongue and some fake credentials, Louis Sanborn has simulated a corporation all by himself, just by pretending to represent it. And Mr. Bates just believes there's a corporation behind that. You know, he makes calls to the lawyers, blah, blah, blah. That's just all, it's all theater. And the point of all that is to rope Bates in and to lead him by the nose to New York with the promise that the corporation lawyers are going to finalize the deal. Once in New York, Sanborn makes the call, reports to Bates that the lawyers, quite miraculously, as they don't exist, are too busy, and then creates a free day for the con to play itself out. Okay? But we have only begun to explain this con, for hasn't Sanborn also conned his cousin Charlie Maxwell? The answer is no. The entire thing is Maxwell's plan. He's the one calling the shots. Okay? Sanborn and the pool room gentleman both answer to Maxwell. Now that may seem incongruous because Maxwell is just a Western Union employee. And the other gentleman is this aristocratic pool room owner who's making a fortune by collecting bets in the hundreds of thousands, right? But none of those things are true. First of all, Maxwell does not work for the Western Union in the least. Now, the obvious objection to that is that Sanborn and Bates went to New York's Central Western Union office, and there was Maxwell running it. And he was running it, but that's not the Western Union office or an office of any kind. It's just a simulation. Okay. The entire thing, office furnishings, teletypes, noisy staff, paper shuffling, wild activity, it's a production set up and performed by a team of first-rate actors entirely for an audience of one, John Bates. And the minute Bates steps in, the sign comes down and they all pack up and move out like a special forces platoon, leaving behind an empty floor space. The entire mob is organized and led by this inside man, Charlie Maxwell, which is, of course, not his real name. Now, since Maxwell's telegraph office is fake, it cannot be giving him special information about which horse will win. But it does convince Bates that such information can be had. That's why Maxwell stages the Western Union show of the office. Okay. Now, here you might stop me and you would say, but wait, Maxwell's horses did win. So what does that mean? As you've no doubt already guessed, it means that the horse pool room, with its cigar smoking and whiskey drinking high roller aristocrats, ticker tape, histrionic caller, cashier window, fat rolls of cash, and a long etc., exists only in John Bates's fertile imagination. It is another expert simulation run by a separate team of actors belonging to Maxwell's mob, whose only purpose is, once again, to create a world for Mr. Bates to inhabit. Even the tens of thousands of dollars that Bates believes he saw others wager do not exist. It's just a couple of thousand in large bills placed on the outside of a great many paper rolls to give the appearance of very large quantities of money. And the minute these monies are placed in the cashier's safe, they're taken out through a secret back door and discreetly recirculated to the fake high rollers for another round of fake wagers. This reduces the amount of real cash needed to stage the pool room. Even so, the whole setup is quite expensive, but the $25,000 trimmed from Mr. Bates, more than $500,000 today, as we said, ain't pennies. Everybody will get paid. And there'll be someone else tomorrow. Maxwell's is a mature business run with a carefully managed appointment book. The call that Sanborn placed when he arrived in New York, ostensibly to consult with the corporation lawyers, well, that was really to Charlie Maxwell to find out when exactly they could play for Bates. Maxwell found a time in his busy schedule of marks, all coming in from different places, brought in by an army of ropers just like Sanborn. So many suckers, so little time. So that's the wire. Next week, I will explain the theory. Well, maybe not next week, maybe the week after. But the next time I talk about the con, I will turn to the theory, because all of this setup that we just went through has an entire theory behind it. And the more you understand that theory, the less vulnerable you will become to this. Because believe me, we are all vulnerable to this. And the main reason is it is incredibly difficult to imagine that everybody around you is an actor putting on a show. That's almost impossible to imagine. And that's why it works. Because it would mean that all of a sudden you became like Truman Burbank in the Truman Show. We have an article about the Truman Show if you want to go check it out on Management of Reality. It's a lot of fun, I think. And it's connected to this topic as well. We're going to put it in the description. If you can do that right away, Yoel, I'll be very grateful. But anyway, that's the reason that people can get fooled, because just imagining that everybody around you is an actor putting on a show for your benefit is almost impossible to do. Now, that's also the reason that the management of reality that we are subjected to works. It is almost impossible for people to accept that the entire media and university system is a show meant to create a phony reality, to manipulate us into behaving in different kinds of political ways that will satisfy the people who are running the meaning-making reality management system. So when we talk about the theory about how the big con works, we will also be talking about the theory of how management of reality on a grand global scale works. Because many of the lessons that the con artists of the big store con teach us are precisely the lessons that we need to understand how the massive management of reality on a global scale works. All right? Anybody who wants to participate in our question and answer sessions, which always happen after my podcasts, all you have to do is join Substack as a paid subscriber. We didn't advertise it on Substack this time. So I don't know how to give you how are we going to get the link this time? Because I forgot to do this, Yoel.
We can send an email right now after
Okay, so this is what we're gonna do. So we're gonna send an email to all our paid subscribers on Substack, and I will also put up a post right now on Substack with the link for the Zoom. So if you join us right now, you will also be able to see it as a post on Substack on the front page, and you can come to the Q&A, and they're a lot of fun. You'll enjoy it. We get to do a lot of theory on the Q&As, and we learn a lot together. Okay, so I'll see you soon, those of you who are paid subscribers, and everybody else, I'll see you on our next podcast.